This episode is brought to you by HASA. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the bottom feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to cover some common myths that you may believe. A lot of pool pros still think this way, and some of these myths about pool chemistry, I think, should have been debunked a long time ago, but of course, it's hard to kind of fix something that's kind of been believed over time in the industry. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy coaching program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support from me. I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. I'll start with this one, and this is one of the things that I often hear out there when pool companies hire people, and this is something that is a practice that was, I think, more prevalent than it is now because of the cost of chemicals. But you would always tell your pool techs that are starting out in your business that you want to shock the pool weekly. There is this company here in my area, and I know a pool tech that worked for them, and the owner had them pour in 2 gallons of liquid chlorine every week. No matter what the chlorine level was in the pool, he would just have them just pour this in. And he would, of course, order from HASA directly, have it delivered to the property. So the pool techs had a full truck of liquid chlorine all the time. I thought this was odd that he would have this mandate of just shocking the pool every week. And this is something that, a myth that I think is in the industry still, where in the summer you have to shock the pool every week. And of course, the truth is, yes, some pools do need shocking when the chlorine level drops below the level that you should be maintaining it at. Now, I could talk the whole podcast on what chlorine level the pool should have. I'm just going to say that you want to factor in cyanuric acid and your baseline chlorine level based on the amount of cyanuric acid in the pool. And I'll just use Bob Lowry's formula. And this, of course, is actually a minimum in the formula, which is your free chlorine level should be 7.5% of your cyanuric acid level. So if your cyanuric acid level in the pool is 100 parts per million, your free chlorine level daily should be 7.5 parts per million. If the cyanuric acid is less, of course, then you would have less free chlorine. And so, yes, if it does fall below the baseline chlorine level for that pool, you will need to shock the pool. However, like I was mentioning, telling employees to pour in 2 gallons of liquid chlorine no matter what the level is not logical. You're just wasting product, and it's not something that's going to be beneficial to the pool. Now, you want to, of course, check the free chlorine level and make sure that it's at that level, and then you would add shock to the pool if necessary. And shocking, of course, is another thing that you have to kind of measure because there's different levels of shock. You can raise it to 10 parts per million, 20 parts per million, 30 parts per million. And if you have some combined chlorine, you're trying to get to the breakpoint of that. So there's all kinds of aspects of shocking. So I think one of the myths is that you can just shock a pool in the summer and that helps maintain it, when in fact, there's a lot of layers to this. There's a lot of different products you can use to bring the chlorine level up. There's a lot of different shock levels that the pool needs. And it's not just something that you can just say, well, if you shock the pool every week, you're going to be fine. That's definitely a myth. And the reality is balancing the pool is important, and calculating the shock level is also a big factor in this equation. Here's another one that I often hear is that all chlorine types are basically the same. They're a sanitizer And so there really isn't any difference if you're going to use cal hypo over liquid chlorine or if you're going to use trichlor tablets. And I think the easy answer is, of course, they're all different because the manufacturers sell different chlorine products for different situations and different usage. For example, the trichlor tablets have probably the most concentrated amount of chlorine, but they're not used for shocking the pool because you can't just add, 4 tablets to the floater if the pool has 0 chlorine and expect it to bring it to the shock level rapidly. And of course, you have your cal hypo and your liquid chlorine, which are used more primarily for raising the chlorine level up rapidly in the pool. You can also use that to maintain the chlorine level. However, you're going to lose some parts per million per week. And since both the liquid chlorine and cal hypo have no stabilizer, no cyanuric acid, and the reason why the trichlor tablets last so long and are for weekly chlorine dosing is that they dissolve slowly, they have cyanuric acid in them, and they're ideal for that particular usage. So they're not the same with any respect, and the strength is all different. And it's really one of those things, when you're starting out in industry, you probably think that they're all the same. Like when you go buy milk at the grocery store, you have vitamin D milk, whole milk, and you have 1%, 2% skim milk. I'm not a big milk person, but I think there's probably more different milks out there. But it's still a dairy product, milk product from a cow, so they're all the same. But in pool service, all the chlorine types are actually very different from themselves. They all have different byproducts. They all have different reasons you're using them. So you can't just say in a blanket statement that all chlorine is the same. You can use whatever in the pool and you'll be fine. I think that's something that you learn as you start to kind of disseminate which chlorine type is best for your pool service use or personal backyard pool use and which one is not as beneficial. And just briefly, I could just say that if you just use trichlor tablets as your primary sanitizer in the pool, if your area doesn't get like 30 or 40 inches of rain during the rainy season or you don't partially drain the pool, you're going to add a lot of cyanuric acid to the pool, which makes things more difficult to maintain. So that's one of the drawbacks. And I would say cal hypo and liquid chlorine. Cal hypo, the byproduct is calcium, liquid chlorine is salt. So those byproducts are a little less harmful to the pool, but everything has a byproduct in nature. Everything has a byproduct in chemistry. And so the chlorine types all have different byproducts. They all have different strengths and they'll have different usage. And the Pool Guy Podcast Show has teamed up with UPA to bring you affordable, reliable liability insurance starting at just $64 a month. Get up to $2 million in coverage, and the members of my coaching group get an even lower rate. Protect your business and your peace of mind. Sign up with UPA today by clicking the link in the podcast description. Here's one where you're going to get a variety of answers depending on who you talk to in the industry. And this is, you can't have too much CYA or stabilizer or cyanuric acid in the pool. Now, there are many people out there that believe that you can maintain a pool properly with very high cyanuric acid, and the truth is you can. You can load up your pool with tablets and have the cyanuric acid at 200 parts per million in the summer, and you can maintain that pool by just adding more and more chlorine to the pool. And this is something that a lot of companies do out there. A lot of people purchase pool routes and they realize that, man, this person had the cyanuric acid at like 250 in every pool, and the pool was maintained pretty well. So there is an argument on one side that the stabilizer level doesn't matter. However, there is rules and there are regulations. Like, for example, in commercial pools here in Los Angeles County, you cannot have more than 100 parts per million of cyanuric acid in the water, because the higher the cyanuric acid level I mentioned earlier, the higher the free chlorine level needs to be, and the somewhat less effective that chlorine is, the higher cyanuric acid level in the pool, the kill rate is reduced pretty dramatically. The kill rate of viruses and bacteria is reduced dramatically, and that's why the LA County has these regulations where you can't have too much cyanuric acid in the water, but you can easily maintain the pool with high cyanuric acid during the summer. It's not something that cannot be done, but there are certain pools with high cyanuric acid that are very difficult in the summer. And so it's one of those things where you can do it, but at the same time, you can't do it on certain accounts, if that makes sense. And believe me, the old school pool guys never really worried about cyanuric acid levels because they would just keep the free chlorine level high by adding more and more tablets. You start the season adding 2 tablets, and then the next month you're adding 3, and by near the mid or end of summer you're adding 4 or 5 tablets to a pool to maintain that chlorine level. And then of course the cyanuric acid level is increasing dramatically. And again, if you don't get a lot of rain in your area, I would say 30 to 40 inches is probably ideal to dilute that pool. Or if you don't do a partial drain of the pool, you're going to have a lot of cyanuric acid in that pool through the winter and then into the next season. So I'm going to say that the better way is to use a combo approach with your pools with trichlor tablets and then liquid chlorine and hypo to bring the chlorine level up. So you're not overusing trichlor tablets and you're not adding, a ton of cyanuric acid to the pool. So there is a little bit of truth in this myth. You can do it, but eventually you're going to hit a wall with these pools that have these really high cyanuric acid if the water is not being diluted in some fashion or some way. Here's one that I think has kind of gone away mostly, but the old timers and when I was trained, I was always taught to put in a weekly algicide to the pool. You would just put in, 1 ounce of sodium bromide in the pool, or you would use a polyquat, squirt it in the pool, or you can use even a copper algicide. The thing is that the algicides, the thinking behind that, I should say, is that adding just a maintenance dose of an algicide will prevent the algae in the pool. And in some respects, this kind of myth has been kind of turned a little bit. And we do use enhancers in the pools now. Like you can use a Polar-X, which is basically like adding a weekly algicide to the pool. You can use borates to 50 parts per million. You can use a phosphate enzyme combination to help prevent algae from growing. So it is kind of like one of those safety nets that hasn't gone away. We just have kind of changed it now to where you're not adding a polyquat or sodium bromide or another algicide in a maintenance dose every week, but you are adding enhancers to help prevent algae from forming in the pool. And I think the reason why this myth that you need to add it, you need these things, and in all honesty, if you sanitize the pool and maintain it at the proper chlorine level, you really don't need anything. But these enhancers are really helpful in the pool industry because we're at the pool once a week, and this is a great way to kind of prevent the pool from turning. If you're a homeowner and you can take care of your pool every day of the week, you probably don't need anything beyond checking the chlorine level, balancing the pool, and adding the sanitizer. But since we're servicing pools and multiple pools, by the way, 70 or 80 pools a week, and the last thing we want to do is have a pool turn on us, spend 20 minutes brushing it, treating it for algae. So there is some logic behind this because you're trying to get through your day. And of course, you're doing more than one pool. You're doing 15 pools a day. And the last thing you want to do is to be battling algae. So it does make sense for pool service to have developed this myth that adding an algicide and maintenance dose is a great way to prevent algae. And there's a little bit of an insurance back there. And enhancers are kind of like an evolution of this to a point where if you're not using enhancers, you're probably going to be struggling out there in the summertime. And I think the actual myth part is that by doing the little algicide thing, you're going to prevent algae in the pool, and you're ignoring a lot of other factors. You're ignoring the proper free chlorine level, you're ignoring clean filtration. All these other factors kind of just go on to the back burner, and just by putting a little algicide in, you think you're going to be fine. So I think this is a dangerous myth because you are not counting all the factors that go into balancing the pool and making sure the pool stays algae free. So be careful thinking that adding an algicide is going to, or even an enhancer is going to make things easy. You do have to balance the water and have to kind of think about the other factors that contribute to algae in a pool. Here's another one, and I just heard this the other day, which is kind of funny, and this is someone who was asking about, a way to maintain the pool without chlorine, like using a saltwater generator. And I find that to be funny in a way because the manufacturers and the salespeople did start out by kind of pushing these as kind of a chlorine alternative. And what they meant by that was you don't have to add chlorine to the pool with tablets, liquid chlorine, and hypo. But somehow it got translated that, or kind of morphed into a saltwater pool is not a chlorine pool, when in fact it is a little miniature chlorine factory and is producing kind of a pure chlorine into the pool. I'm kind of dating myself, but back in the day when I was doing pool service in the 90s, there were a lot of gas chlorine companies. They would have these canisters, and they would have a route where they would just, I had some accounts actually that had gas chlorine service too. I wasn't doing it, but there was a gas chlorine company that was servicing the pool. And they would pull up back there. It was like a little 3-minute stop for them, basically. Go back there, put the gas chlorine into the pool, and then head on their way out. And kind of very similar, these saltwater generators are doing kind of that. I don't think there's any companies in my area anymore, by the way, that do gas chlorine. But this is what the saltwater generator does. So this myth kind of got propagated. I'm going to just give the manufacturers the benefit of the doubt and say by accident, by smart marketing, and the marketing was too good, and people just started believing this, and people still, till this day, will say, yeah, I have a saltwater pool, so I don't use chlorine in my pool. Really, it's something that if you do pool service, it is a saltwater pool is a chlorine pool. And if you're a homeowner looking to buy a saltwater system, which, by the way, I really like the saltwater systems because it's a way to add chlorine to the pool without having to think about it too much. But in reality, it's probably the actual best form of adding chlorine to the pool, believe it or not. And so it is a chlorine pool, no matter how you look at it. You're just not adding chlorine products to the pool. You're not adding liquid chlorine, dichlor, trichlor, hypo to the pool on a regular basis. And there are non-chlorine pool systems out there like biguanide. I don't really have any on my route. I've never dealt with it, but that's a non-chlorine kind of pool that you can maintain without chlorine. But you're going to need some kind of sanitizer in the pool, regardless of either with the saltwater generator or by adding chlorine. So the saltwater pool is a form of sanitizing the pool. It just requires less manual addition of chlorine to the pool. Looking for other podcasts, you can go to my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. On the banner, click on the podcast icon. There'll be a drop-down menu of close to 1,800 podcasts now. And if you are interested in my coaching program, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.